Yo, hi, my name is TechDave. Today we're looking at the absolutely beastly workstation Lenovo ThinkPad P51 and why I think you should buy this device if it suits your needs and specifications and interests in 2022. So before we dive in, I'm just going to have to ask you to like, subscribe and share and possibly tick the bell icon on this video because I need the subscriber count because I'm trying to get monetized, and it means that I'll be able to afford to make more high quality content, and it means that it shows me as well that there's some value and utility in what I'm doing here, so that's really cool. If you could do that for me. Basically we're going to go through like a device overview, so we're going to talk about system specs, ports, blah 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 blah, some issues I've had with it, my music production setup, which is over there, and my gaming and video editing setup, which is over there, some benchmarks, synthetics, some gaming benchmarks, some on-the-go gaming, and then talk about future upgrades and my conclusions about the device, and then that'll be the end of the video. So you'll see the chapters should be marked along the bottom of the video, and I may include timestamps depending how well that chaptering works out in DaVinci. So I'm going to just dive right into the features and specifications of the laptop. Oh, I also wanted to mention, shout out to everyone on Twitter. I got there's only 22 votes, but the decision to make this video was based on a Twitter post, which should be about here, where everyone voted to see this over potentially doing a video on the X230, which I have here with my note-taking reference device. The X230, so with an Arch install and various Japanese keyboard and 16 gig 133 megahertz RAM. So that'll probably be the next video. But yeah, I just wanted to give it a shout out there. So I'm going to pause and then be back with the specifications of the laptop. So for the P51, we have got the 7th gen i7-7820HQ at 2.9 to 3.8 gigahertz, so that's a turbo speed of 3.8, at 4 cores, 8 threads. There is also an option available with, I believe, a 16 core, 32 thread Xeon, or 8 thread 16 Xeon, but we'll look more at that later on when we're looking at the buying options, which will be towards the end. It's got an NVIDIA Quadro N2200 4GB built-in GPU, as well as Intel HD 630 graphics, which is really handy for, as you'll see later on the go stuff, because you can disable the built-in GPU and then just use the Intel HD graphics, which sips battery life in comparison to using the 4GB graphics card. It's got 2 times 16, so 32 gigs of DDR4, 66 megahertz, but it's only run at 2400 megahertz. I'm not sure why. It's got a 1080p touchscreen display. With an X-Rite Pantone color calibrator with 10-point multi-touch. It's got boot drive is a 500 gig NVMe SSD, and then for my games and anything that needs to run efficiently, 1 terabyte NVMe Gen 4 SSD, which run at full speed, which maybe show some disk read-write specs later on. It's got a 135 watt PSU for my music setup, and then I think a 175 or 230 PSU for my video editing setup. I've got a Sierra Wireless 7455 4G LTE modem, which in theory goes up to 300 megabits, but is actually capped, because I'm using Vodafone as my SIM card, it's capped at about 60 megabits per second, but that's the fastest speed in the UK, so I'm still pleased with it. And I also have, to accompany it, as you may have seen in the last video, which will be somewhere up here, the Lenovo Legion boost station with an XFX Radeon RX 488 GB and a 2 terabyte 7200 RPM drive. I've also got on my music desk another external drive, which is 2 terabytes as well. And then, one other thing that I missed is I've recently added 1 terabyte just SATA 7200 RPM internal drive in the other bay. So other than that, that is the entire specifications of the unit. And I guess the next thing to look at is ports and the overview of the actual physical specs of the device. I'll be back with that. So as you can see, this is the 1080p multi-touch, 10-point multi-touch touchscreen there. We've also got a really fast-acting fingerprint reader. We've got the X-Rite Pantone color calibrator as mentioned. We've got a full numeric keypad. Currently got a German keyboard, but we'll talk about that more in a bit. And then we've got 3 track point buttons now working. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit. Amazing, quite sufficiently large trackpad. And a 720p webcam, bit lackluster, but it looks all right. Like built-in microphones, which I believe are here and here. And then, so in regards to ports, we've just got here on the left-hand side, we've got an SDXC card reader, so like really high-speed card reader. We've got Express Card, which you know I love because it's got the eGPU potential, but it's also, so I can potentially have up to 4 graphics cards, as I showed in the last video, which will be just about here. Then that's the CPU fan event again. We've got the power supply input. We've got HDMI. We've got a Thunderbolt 3 or USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 port, Ethernet, 2 high-speed USBs, one of which is always on for charging your phone. And then we've got 2 more high-speed USBs, USB 3, or they're all USB 3, DisplayPort, and a what's it called, a headphone and microphone jack, and then the vent for the GPU as well. So both of these are the GPU's vent as far as I'm aware. And as you can see on the bottom, we've also got the docking connector, GPU and CPU fans, and then we've got the battery, which I will put the specs of on the in the video, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's actually have a look. So we got a 77 rated. I don't know what capacity that is. That is 11.25 volt, 8 amps at 90 watts per hour. I don't know any more about it than that, but that'll be included. As you can see here, I've also got a SIM card, which is, I mentioned before, in Vodafone, a little slot loading SIM card under the battery. And then the docking connector connects to one of the 2 docks I've got, which are identical, but yeah, I've got 2 docks for it, one for each setup. Now I'm gonna probably move on to the docking stations, because as you've noticed on this device, for a workstation, it's only got 4 USB ports, and whilst you can use that Thunderbolt port to expand your dongle, with the dongle to expand your port options, I use that for my eGPU generally when I'm video editing or when I'm gaming, so I like to keep that free for that and then have the docking station. So I'll just grab a docking station and then be back. So by the magic power of video editing, I now have the docking station, which has got the connector there, the little connecty bits that does connecting to connect the device, blah 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 blah. So on the docking station, we've got the power button, eject button, locking mechanism for the keys. We've got a Kensington lock slot there. We've got headphone microphone jack, which is really handy having an additional one of those. VGA, which I was very pleased to see. That's probably because of the Quadro. DVI, not DVI-E, I think it is, rather than DVI-D. 2 display ports, 1 HDMI, power, Ethernet, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 USB ports. The last one of which you can charge your phone on even if the laptop's not docked, and then there's nothing else particularly notable about the dock. But I would highly recommend, if you're getting this laptop, to buy this docking station, purely because of, especially if you're using it with an eGPU, having those extra USB ports at the back is supremely useful, and I wouldn't really find the device that usable as a workstation, particularly with just 4 USB ports in like a kind of docked desktop setup, which is how I'd honestly recommend using this, because obviously it's very portable. I mean, I'll show the weight now on screen, but I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's a big, I think it's 15.1 inch, but again, I'll correct that if I'm incorrect, but it's a big, chunky, heavy beast, and the battery life isn't really that great. You can get over 4 hours with just the Intel 630 graphics, But then if you're doing anything that this device is actually useful for, you get it around 2 hours. So like video editing or gaming or CAD or anything that you might be doing that's more intensive, you only get about 2 hours battery life out of it. And I will recommend to get an additional battery, possibly even 2 if that's kind of your workflow. But I would say go with the docking station. I actually have 2 of them, so I have one just over there for my video gaming and video editing suite, and then just one over there as well for my music production suite. So I'll show you a little bit more about that in a bit. So now we look at my, just to show you how I've got it set up really, my music setup. So over here we've got video editing. So I'll come back, you'll see more of this setup later, but it's for video editing and gaming. So I've got the eGPU there, a second monitor, then I have that monitor, blah, 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 blah. I've got my server underneath there on a KVM so I can switch, because that thing's an editing beast. But, so it's got like 8 gig quadro, 64 gigs of DDR3 and 32 cores, 16 cores, 32 threads, etc. Blah, blah, blah. There's a video about it if you want to see. I've got my blah, 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 blah. We'll come back to this, but yeah, I've got 2 setups, with both of which I've got the dock for. And I've got my little narration / streaming / chat mic there. But over here, I'm actually connected to it. Let's start over here. So we've got, whoopsie daisy, excuse me. Start over here. We've got 2 drum kits linked up to use as one sort of setup. So you can have sound effects and e-drum style like pad bits there, and then a full acoustic kit style electric kit there. Got my bass amp. We've got this Midas mixer which I'm still setting up, so I'm not using that at the moment, but and there's my Hench bass amp. We've got my key station, we've got a little headphone amp there, we've got Launchpad Pro, we've got the Elisa's Firewire mixer, which, and then a picture of me on a bench. Elisa's Firewire mixer, which is a bit finicky but does work via this express card to Firewire adapter, which is sick. My big mixer that you may have seen in another video does not work with this for some reason, some compliancy to do with the Firewire thing. It just doesn't work. But this device has got decent, modern enough drivers that it actually works. And I've got that all chained out to this absolutely. So I've got double speakers for, as basically acting as tweeters, but I can also have just them on. And then I've got my big beastie proper studio speakers, which sound absolutely just hench as hell. And I can so I can switch on and off each set of speakers. So I'll show you in a minute some stuff with that. And basically I wanted to show you how it functions running Ableton 11. Let me just check that it's picked up my sound card. It has indeed. Cool. And then we'll bounce into Ableton 11. And I'm just going to pause here and then come back once the project file's loaded, and I'll talk about some performance and some reservations I've got with it. Just like magic, we're in Ableton. So as you can see, I've got quite an intense track. So what I've done, I've got my vertical monitor there, which I generally keep the mixer on, but you can obviously, if you know Ableton, you know you can switch back and forth between session and arrangement views depending on what you're doing. But it's quite nice having all your clips lined up here, as you can see where the mouse is moving, clips lined up with session view here, and then having the arrangement here, because I have plans. Let's say I have plans. Now, in regards to performance in Ableton 11, which is what I'm using on this system at the moment, if I were to buy this device again, I would get the Xeon probably, because most of what I need it for is CPU related tasks, if you see what I mean. So for example, so there's so many tracks in this score here that I'm working on, and as you can see that there are a bunch of group tracks as well. And the issue is that, well, it's not so much an issue, it handles it well, but if I was to buy this specifically for music production or just video editing rather than gaming, which is why I wanted the i7, I would get the Xeon, because for each one of these tracks that's assigned here, that's set up, the CPU uses a single core or thread per track. So say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So those 8 tracks will all be individually processed on one core of the CPU. So when you go over 8 cores, you're then using 2 tracks per core, and they sort of, I hope that makes sense. So for music production for this device, I would actually recommend to go with the Xeon, and possibly video editing as well, because it's nice to have lots of cores at a slightly lower clock speed for music production and for video editing. So that would be preferable. But as you can see, I am able to run pretty extensive, pretty chunky little tracks. So I'm just going to let this run a little bit. Actually, let me just pause that. So yeah, I'm able to run some pretty intensive arrangements on it. And the CPU doesn't throttle too much. I don't know whether you can see it. In fact, I'll tell you what, before we do this, let me pause. So up in the top right, you see where the cursor is there? Just next to it, there's a little box. When the CPU gets slightly overloaded, you'll see it there. But also, I'm going to put up Task Manager on while the track is running, so you can see the performance metrics on the other screen, which actually that's probably not going to be that useful. But so as you can see, just sitting with the track paused, I don't really be able to see that. Sitting with the track paused, we're on quarter CPU usage and a 22% RAM usage. This track is running off my NVMe 1TB drive, so there shouldn't be any bottlenecks with the read speeds. This is actually quite a sick track. It's for a project I'm working on. It's called the I'll wait for the drop. It's a sick tune. So yeah, anyway, that's just a track I'm working on. And it shows you, so it can handle a pretty intense workload across like so many tracks. But yeah, the point being, I'd recommend, if you're buying it for music production, get the Xeon. And just to show you a little bit of my setup, play a little bit of my track. There's a nice little section just here. Anyway, it can handle a ton of stuff, so that's my music production setup and a little overview of how it functions. So we'll be on to the next section. Also, one last thing before we move on. At this setup, I can actually, because the 4 gig built-in Quadro, pretty decent for non-gaming workloads. So I'm just gonna show you, for example, so we've got a fairly long video with quite a lot in it. You see all the clips just along here, and I think it's about 11 minutes, and I'll just zoom in. You can see it's quite happily, without the eGPU, rendering out an 11-minute video at 1080p 60 frames per second at roughly 26 minutes. So like, well, what is that, just over twice the length of the video for 1080p 60, and it does 4K 30 pretty well as well. So it's not an insubstantial graphics card, and it also means that if I'm editing something on the go, or I'm using NVINC to record what I'm doing in Ableton, for example, I've got like a pretty decent graphics card just built in, and then when that doesn't have enough grunt, we move all the way around to this setup with my eGPU just tucked behind there, meaning that I can game and video edit and all that sort of stuff as well. So I've got the two little desk setups sort of working, but I just wanted to show you that I can actually edit on this setup, and it's nice because this is like a 40 or 42 inch TV, giving you that a little bit more screen real estate, but it's not very good quality display, so I prefer to use the one behind. But I just wanted to mention that you can in fact natively video edit on the device as well, and it's really not an issue. It doesn't need the eGPU to be a functional creation tool, but when we go to the eGPU, that's where the RX 480 comes into play, because then I can game in really high quality as well, whereas I only get like 30 to 45 frames per second and a little bit of latency, and I have to use low settings, stuff like that, on the Quadro, because it's not necessarily optimized for gaming. So here we are all set up and running, and it's literally a case of just, with the eGPU, you press the power on the eGPU after plugging in the USB-C cable, and then that connects to your screen. Simple. And then this screen is on the eGPU, that screen is on the built-in graphics, this screen, and then I have my microphone over here for doing either voiceovers or for communicating with people in Discord and on stream. I have Discord open on the vertical monitor there, but I'll keep that not shown. It's got my friends there, and then OBS. I'll move this microphone out of the way. OBS runs on using NVENC on the built-in Quadro, and then I render the game on the eGPU over on this screen, meaning that I split the workload between the two different graphics cards, which is actually really handy. And that's where I have my OBS for monitoring the stream and the chat or whatever. Normally I have a green screen, so as you can see from this little angle here, normally the rest of my head would not be visible, and I just have a green screen, so and my logo, etc, blah blah blah. And so what I was going to do is just, if I can, just cut to a little bit of footage from a live stream of mine, so I'll be back.